As Sarah lay in her bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. She tried to ignore it, but the feeling only grew stronger with each passing moment. Suddenly, she heard a creaking sound coming from the closet. Her heart pounding, she got out of bed and slowly approached the closet door. With trembling hands, she opened the door, and to her horror, she saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at her. She screamed and ran out of the room, but the eyes followed her, always watching, always waiting. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah couldn't escape a feeling that she was being watched. She tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination, but the eyes were always there, watching, waiting. Finally, unable to take it anymore, Sarah decided to confront her fear head-on. She walked back into her room and stood in front of the closet door. Taking a deep breath, she opened it once again. But this time, there was nothing there. No glowing eyes, no monster, no creature. Just an empty closet. Confused and relieved, Sarah breathed a sigh of relief and turned to leave. But as she did, she saw a small note on the floor. Picking it up, she read the words written on it in shaky handwriting. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. I just wanted someone to talk to." Shocked and touched, Sarah realized that the eyes she had been seeing were those of a lonely ghost who just wanted a friend. From that day forward, Sarah and the ghost became close friends, and she was never afraid again. As Emily walked home from work, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following her. Every time she turned around, she saw no one, but the feeling persisted. Finally, she made it to her apartment and breathed a sigh of relief as she locked the door behind her. But as she turned to head to her bedroom, she saw a figure standing in the corner of her living room. It was a dark, shadowy figure with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through her soul. Emily froze, unable to move or scream. Suddenly, the figure spoke. "Don't be afraid," it said. "I'm not here to harm you. I'm here to warn you." Emily didn't know what to make of this. "Warn me about what?" she asked. The figure moved closer. "Your ex-boyfriend," it said. "He's coming for you. You need to leave this place and never come back." Emily was shocked. She had broken up with her ex months ago and hadn't heard from him since. But as she looked closer at the figure, she saw that it was wearing her ex's old jacket. Realizing the danger she was in, Emily quickly packed her things and left her apartment. As she walked away, she couldn't help but wonder what other secrets her ex had been keeping from her. Lucas had always been fascinated by the abandoned asylum on the edge of town. He had heard all the stories about the horrors that had taken place there, and he longed to explore the decaying halls and uncover the secrets hidden within its walls. One night, he decided to take matters into his own hands. He snuck into the asylum through a broken window, his heart pounding with excitement and fear. As he wandered through the dark and twisted corridors, he heard strange noises and saw eerie shadows moving in the corners of his vision. He felt as though he was being watched by unseen eyes, and he knew that he was not alone in the asylum. Finally, he came to a room where the door was locked. He jiggled the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Frustrated, he turned to leave, but he heard a strange whispering coming from the other side of the door. Intrigued, he leaned in closer to listen. The whispers grew louder and more insistent, until suddenly, the door swung open. Lucas was sucked into the room by an unseen force, and the door slammed shut behind him. He was plunged into darkness, and he felt cold fingers wrap around his neck. Panic set in as he struggled to break free, but the grip around his neck only tightened. The whispers grew louder and more menacing, until they formed a coherent sentence. "You should not have come here, Lucas. Now you will never leave." With a final gasp for air, Lucas's lifeless body fell to the ground. The asylum had claimed another victim, and his spirit would join the countless others trapped within its walls for all eternity. Sarah was a college student who had just moved into a new apartment in the city. It was an old building with creaky floors and dimly lit hallways, but she loved the charm of the place. One night, Sarah was awoken by a strange noise coming from the hallway. It sounded like footsteps, but she knew that no one else should be in the building at that hour. She got out of bed and cautiously made her way to the door, peering through the peephole to see if anyone was there. But all she could see was darkness. Feeling uneasy, Sarah went back to bed, but the noise continued. It sounded like someone was walking back and forth in the hallway outside her apartment. Suddenly, the doorknob started to turn. Sarah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that she had locked the door, but someone or something was trying to get in. The door slowly opened, revealing a figure standing in the shadows. It was a tall, dark figure, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Sarah tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure stepped into her apartment, and she could feel its cold breath on her face. But just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving Sarah alone in her apartment. Terrified, Sarah called the police, but they found no evidence of anyone breaking in or even being in the building at that time. The experience left Sarah shaken, and she could never explain what had happened that night. Years later, Sarah learned the dark history of her apartment building. It was built on the site of an old cemetery, and many people believe that the restless spirits of the dead still roam the halls. Sarah realized that the figure she had seen that night was likely a ghost, and she was grateful that it had only been a fleeting encounter. It was a cold, dark night in the middle of winter. Jane and her friends were driving back from a party in the countryside when their car suddenly broke down on a deserted road. As they got out of the car to assess the damage, they noticed a large, abandoned mansion in the distance. Hoping to find help, they decided to make their way over to the mansion. But as they approached the house, they could feel an eerie presence, and the feeling of dread grew stronger with every step they took. The mansion was old and decrepit, with vines crawling up the walls and windows boarded up. As they pushed open the front door, they were hit by a musty smell, and the sound of creaking floorboards echoed through the empty halls. They searched the house for any signs of life, but found nothing but dusty furniture and old cobwebs. Suddenly, they heard a faint whisper, and turned to see a ghostly figure standing before them. Its eyes glowed a bright red, and its face twisted into a menacing smile. The figure started to move towards them, and they realized with horror that they were not alone in the mansion. They tried to run, but the doors and windows had all been boarded shut, trapping them inside. The ghostly figure continued to advance, and the friends could feel its icy breath on their faces. They huddled together in fear, waiting for the end to come. But just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving the friends alone in the mansion. They managed to break down a boarded window and escaped, running to the nearest police station. They reported the incident, but when the police arrived at the mansion, there was no sign of anyone or anything inside. The friends never spoke of that night again, but they could never forget the terrifying experience they had in the abandoned mansion. Sarah had just moved into a new apartment, excited to start her life in the big city. But as soon as she started to settle in, strange things began to happen. At first, it was small things like objects moving on their own, doors creaking shut, and strange whispers in the middle of the night. But as time went on, the activity in her apartment grew more and more intense. One night, Sarah woke up to the sound of scratching coming from her bedroom closet. She got out of bed and cautiously approached the closet door, her heart racing with fear. As she opened the door, she was greeted by a pair of glowing eyes staring back at her from the darkness. She could hear the faint sound of breathing and the scratching grew louder and more frantic. She slammed the closet door shut and tried to catch her breath. As she sat there, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike. The next day, Sarah decided to call in a paranormal investigator to help her figure out what was happening in her apartment. The investigator arrived and set up his equipment, and they began to explore the apartment together. As they entered the bedroom, they noticed that the closet door was slightly ajar. They cautiously approached the door, and as they opened it, they found themselves face to face with a demon. The demon lunged at them, and they ran for the front door, narrowly escaping with their lives. Sarah never returned to that apartment, but she could never forget the terror she had experienced at the hands of the demon that had possessed her home. Mark had always been fascinated by abandoned places, so when he heard about an old, decrepit mansion just outside of town, he knew he had to explore it. He convinced his friends to come along, and they set out on a mission to uncover the secrets of the mansion. As they approached the mansion, they noticed that the door was slightly ajar. They cautiously entered the building, their hearts racing with anticipation. They explored the main floor, but found nothing of interest, so they decided to venture upstairs. As they climbed the stairs, they heard strange whispers coming from the darkness. The whispers grew louder and more intense, and soon they could hear a voice calling out to them. "Get out," the voice said. "Get out before it's too late." But they were determined to press on. They continued up the stairs until they reached the top floor, where they found a locked door. Mark pulled out his trusty lock-picking kit and managed to unlock the door, revealing a hidden room. Inside the room, they found an old book on a pedestal. The book was covered in strange symbols, and they could feel an eerie energy emanating from it. Mark picked up the book and began to read the incantations, not realizing the danger he was putting himself and his friends in. As he finished the final incantation, the room began to shake, and a portal to another dimension opened up in front of them. Out of the portal stepped a horde of demons, ready to claim their souls. Mark and his friends ran for their lives, but it was too late. The demons caught up with them and dragged them back into the portal, never to be seen again. The mansion stood empty once again, a testament to the dangers of curiosity and the power of the unknown. As a young child, Jamie always felt like she was being watched. She would see shadows move in her peripheral vision and hear whispers in the darkness of the bedroom at night. Her parents tried to assure her that it was just her imagination, but Jamie knew there was something more sinister at play. Years passed and Jamie grew up, but the feeling of being watched never left her. She tried to ignore it, telling herself that it was just her mind playing tricks on her. But one night, she couldn't ignore it anymore. She was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep when she felt a cold breath on her face. She opened her eyes to see a figure standing over her bed, its face shrouded in darkness. Jamie tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure just stood there, watching her. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the figure spoke. Its voice was raspy and cold, sending shivers down Jamie's spine. "I've been watching you for a long time," it said. "You belong to me now." Jamie tried to fight back, but she couldn't move. She was paralyzed with fear as the figure reached out and touched her forehead. She felt a sharp pain and then everything went black. When Jamie woke up, she was lying on the floor of the bedroom. She sat up, rubbing her forehead where the figure had touched her. She looked around, but there was no sign of the figure. Jamie thought she had escaped, but then she noticed something strange. There was a mark on her forehead, a mark that looked like a handprint. It was a mark that would never go away, a mark that would always remind her of the night she was taken by the entity that had been watching her all her life. It was a typical Friday night and a group of friends decided to go on a hiking trip to a nearby forest. The forest was known to be a popular spot for campers and hikers, but the locals always warned them to avoid it at night. The group of friends, however, brushed off the warnings and continued on their journey. As they made their way deeper into the forest, they noticed that the trees were becoming denser and the air around them grew colder. Suddenly, one of them pointed to a dilapidated cabin in the distance. The cabin was old and run down, with vines and weeds growing all around it. It looked abandoned, but as they got closer, they noticed that the front door was slightly ajar. They cautiously made their way inside and found themselves in a dimly lit room. The walls were covered in cobwebs and dust, and the furniture was old and worn out. As they explored the cabin, they heard strange noises coming from upstairs. One of them suggested that they leave, but the others were curious and decided to investigate further. As they climbed the stairs, the noises grew louder and more unsettling. When they reached the top, they found themselves in a room with a single chair facing a small television set. The television was flickering, and the screen showed nothing but static. Suddenly, the chair slowly turned around, and they saw an old man with hollow eyes staring back at them. He had a crazed look on his face and his mouth was twisted into a sinister grin. "Welcome," he said in a raspy voice. "I've been waiting for you." The friends were frozen in fear as the old man stood up and began to approach them. Just as they thought they were trapped, the door to the cabin burst open and a group of police officers stormed in, guns drawn. The old man was arrested, and the group of friends were shocked to learn that he was a notorious serial killer who had been on the run for years. He had been using the cabin as his hideout and had been luring hikers and campers there to kill them. As the friends made their way back home, they realized just how close they had come to becoming the old man's victims. They never again ignored the warnings of the locals and vowed to always stay vigilant during their outdoor adventures. It was a stormy night, and the power had gone out in this small town. Sarah, a young woman who lived alone in a small house at the edge of town, lit some candles and tried to make herself comfortable. As the storm raged on, she heard a knock at the door. She hesitated at first, but then decided to see who it was. When she opened the door, she saw a man standing outside, drenched from the rain. He asked to come in, saying he needed to use the phone to call for help. Sarah hesitated, but eventually let him in. As the man made the call, Sarah noticed something odd about him. He seemed to be staring at her intently, almost as if he was studying her. She tried to ignore it, but the feeling persisted. After he made the call, the man thanked Sarah and asked to use the bathroom to dry off. As he went upstairs, Sarah heard strange noises coming from the bathroom. She tried to ignore them, but they only grew louder and more disturbing. Suddenly, the noises stopped, and the man came back downstairs. As he made his way to the door, Sarah noticed something strange on his back. It looked like something was moving under his skin. She screamed and tried to run, but the man was too quick. He grabbed her and dragged her into the darkness. The next morning, the storm had passed, and the power was back on in the town. But Sarah was nowhere to be found. The only thing left behind was a small, strange-looking creature, crawling out of a hole in the ground.